We do not live on in any immaterial soul spiritual way. That is just a myth. That is a lie. That is wishful thinking. And if you're basing your life on that, you're wasting precious time of the real life that we have as biological animals in this natural environment.
Truth of it is, if you set aside Jesus Christ, no one knows what comes after death. So it's very interesting that you here have Dan, a champion of reason, who has to admit that he has no idea what comes after death, just as the caterpillar has no idea it's going to become a butterfly. And yet Dan states as a factual matter, it's a myth, it's a lie. Why would somebody be so passionate about something that they have absolutely no information about? I would suggest that Dan is taking a faith-based rejection of life after death. In other words, Dan doesn't want there to be a life after death. Why? And we forget this. He keeps telling us believers want to live forever. Atheists don't want to live forever. Why? Because nobody wants to be judged for their actions. If there is a death, there may well be a last judgment. Or even in other religions, there's cosmic justice. So there's, in a way, for many people, a desire to avoid moral accountability. And therefore they will profess as fact something that they do not know to be a fact. In reality, there's actually some powerful indications that there is life after death. I go into these in a recent book of mine. I'm not going to belabor the arguments now. The little empirical evidence we do have, and that is these near-death experiences. People who are not dead, but very close to death. They have cardiac arrest, their brain has stopped showing any signs of activity, and yet they report experience. They're conscious, they say they are pulled through a tunnel, they see a bright light, they feel their life come before them, they encounter deceased relatives and friends, they are in the presence of a celestial being. There are thousands of these near-death experiences reported all over the world. They're taking place right now. And if they are true, if all these people aren't conspiring and all lying, and frankly no one thinks they are, the truth of it is that shows that consciousness and experience can survive the breakdown of your bodily functions. That's empirical evidence. The atheists have no evidence. They don't want there to be life after death, so it's only wishful thinking on their part that there should be no last judgment and no life after death. At the very least, I wish they'd just step back and say they don't have a clue.
I would like there to be life after death. I never said that. I think it would be fascinating if that were true, to extend our lives. I think
so why do you say it's a lie when you have no idea one way or the other?
Because what does death mean, right? You mean the death of the body. Your evidence is not evidence for life after death. It's a near-death experience. You haven't crossed any line with these near-death experiences. They're evidence for something going on in our mind. In fact, do you know that these same chemicals that are released to the brain when people are dying, these opioids and endorphins, have been administered to people who are not dead, and under the experience of these opioids, they had near-death experiences. The brain hallucinates, and when the brain goes, it's fighting to live, and it does hallucinate in all these ways and has these interesting, fast, even atheists will have near-death experiences and not think it's Jesus. A Muslim will see Allah, right? A Christian will see Jesus, and atheists, who knows, we see a blank piece of paper, I suppose, but what you just gave us is not evidence for life after death. It's for evidence for how the brain functions near death. And, you know, if there's a life after, and if there's a judgment, if there's a God, I'm not fighting that. I'm not afraid of moral restrictions. I'm not afraid of being judged. You know, if I'm going to be judged, fine, I'll own up to my judgment. I don't want somebody else paying the death penalty for my actions. We atheists are responsible and mature about this. And in spite of the fact that I might wish to live forever, I'm going to stick with what we do know. And we do not know at this point, beyond what some holy book tells us, that there's any life after death.
Well, you say that there is a prevailing theory, which I discussed at some length. It's called the dying brain hypothesis. And that is, it tries to explain the near-death experiences by saying that when your brain is dying, it goes into shutdown mode, and it has these experiences of a tunnel, a bright light, but it's just special effects generated by the dying brain. There's one serious problem with this hypothesis that has never been answered. There are tens of thousands of people who have had near-death experiences. Where are they now? Answer, they're walking around. They're going to work, they have families, they drive cars. So if their brains have died, the dying brain in the process of shutting down has generated the near-death experience, how has their brain reversed the entire process, evidently healed itself, so it's now functioning completely normally? It would be sort of like saying, I've turned off the car, I've taken the key out, and the car is still running. So the truth of it is these near-death experiences cannot be so easily dismissed. Dan is trying to dismiss them by saying, look, the only evidence I'll accept is if a dead guy gets out of the coffin, shows up at his funeral, and gives the tribute to himself. True, we don't have that kind of evidence. The near-death experience is the closest people come to death. Many of these people are clinically dead. They should not be having experience, and yet they do. So what gets me is the atheists are always asking for facts. Give us experience. Don't cite the Bible. Don't give us legends. Give us actual empirical evidence. Here I put 10,000 cases on the table, and Dan goes, well, haven't convinced me yet. What's he waiting for?